I want to ask maybe a little bit about the mechanics of being able to do this, because a 706, a form, IRS Form 706 is an estate tax return. And a 706 NA is for a non-resident alien, an estate tax return for a non-resident alien. But if you're a non-resident alien, you don't have a social security number.
Correct.
So how do you file a 706 with the IRS?
Well, typically you would have, the best case scenario, you would have to get what's called an ITIN. It stands for International Taxpayer Identification Number. It is a Social Security equivalent that is specifically designed for people who do not meet the requirements for getting a Social Security number, but who have financial interests in the United States. If you haven't gotten one prior to your death, it can be a problem. I'm actually probating an estate of a gentleman who had a house in Foster City, which is a suburb that's about 20 miles from here. He paid all cash for the house, and he paid all of the property tax bills and expenses through his bank account in Hong Kong. So when he died, he did not have an ITIN, and we did obviously have to file an estate tax return because he was well over the $60,000 threshold. It took, I think, almost 9 months to just get an ITIN for him. There is a procedure that you can go through with the IRS, but it takes a long time to go through the procedure. But, we had no way of really filing the estate tax return until we were able to get an ITIN for him.
So an ITIN is a barrier to getting that. That has to be got. You have to get that before you can file a 706 NA. And what about, aren't there treaties that the U.S. has to maybe offer some type of relief from this $60,000 exemption amount from the estate tax?
There are treaties with a certain number of countries, but it's not with that many countries. I'm probating. No, let me take that back because that one didn't work. Yeah, there are countries where there are treaties, but it's a handful of countries where that's done. What typically happens is, rather than a treaty that would completely exempt a person from U.S. taxes, it's a treaty where they look at what the relative tax rates are in the two countries. So, for example, we have a treaty with England, with the UK. Our estate tax rate is 40% over $1 million worth of assets. The UK estate tax is set at a lower number than that. So in the UK, I think that if you've got far less than $1 million, let's just say that both of them started. Let's for comparison purposes say both started $1 million. So in the US, the estate tax would be 40%, 400,000. Let's say that in the UK, the rate would be 26%, so 260,000. The way that the treaties work is similar to the way that they work for income tax when you've got a person who has to pay income taxes in two countries. The rule would be that the first $260,000 would go to the UK, and the remaining $140,000 would be paid over to the IRS in the United States, so that overall the person didn't pay more than 40%, but they split who gets which portion of the amount of money. So flip that and say that the U.S. tax rate was 40% and England's were 45%. The first 40% would go to the U.S. and the remaining 5% would go to England.
I had an estate where the decedent was from Canada, and the U.S. and Canada have an estate tax treaty. And in that tax treaty, it apportioned U.S. situs assets and worldwide assets. And so if your U.S. situs assets were 30% of your estate of worldwide assets, then you got 30% of the exemption amount that a U.S. citizen would have. And so that's how the Canada tax treaty worked. And there's a difference between income tax treaties and gift and estate tax treaties. And so you have to see which, and there aren't many countries that have an estate tax treaty with the US.
Correct.
One of the countries that does not have an estate tax treaty with the United States is Mexico. And so a lot of times that's a big issue with persons that are Mexican citizens, Mexican domiciliaries, and that have US situs property.